from Toronto to Tokyo, and from Thonia to Syrinx, this is The Basement, your companion to the Ready Player One novel. Join our hosts each episode for complete chapter breakdowns and deep dives into the pop culture references through a series of challenges and homework assignments. The Basement is the Ready Player One podcast for people who love things. And now, please welcome Albert and the rest of the Gunchers for this week's episode. Welcome, everyone, to the second part of episode 000. I've called this Electric Boogaloo, but you're listening to The Basement, and we are going to break down the rest of the prologue. But before we do, just I'd like to welcome back our two hosts that showed up for the first episode. First off, Mike. Mike, how are you doing tonight?
Fantastic. This should be, the first time was definitely not what I expected, but it was fun. So I'm sure this will be fun because we're going to pick on you at some point in this show. So.
Oh, I have no doubt. And don't forget it. Everyone always remembers your first time. So it should go without saying. And also joining us tonight is none other than Mr. Will Wilkins. Will, how's it going tonight?
I am doing well, sir. I am punctual and ready to go.
Great. Good to hear. Inside joke. We'll get to that probably later. But
keyword is later.
So we're going to...
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So we're going to... we got a little late start tonight, but you guys don't know the difference. So we're going to start by kind of talking through some news real quick. I don't expect this will be a regular segment for the show just because once the movie's out, we probably won't have enough content to really kind of fill in. But nonetheless, I wanted to start off by talking about the movie ticket. So when this episode airs... the movie will be, well, let's see, it'll be already out and have been out for a few days. But let's start with Mike. Mike, have you had a chance to buy your tickets? And if so, what kind of tickets have you bought? What kind of showing are you doing?
First off, I think it's rather funny that, you were talking about content. And I think this prologue here is long enough to last for like 5 weeks here because we get so much content. But in any case, I have not bought my tickets yet because I don't imagine it'll be a problem for me. But I will be getting my tickets soon. I got to do it real quick, get my tickets, be ready to go first night. And I'm looking forward to it, actually. I'm more excited about this than The Last Jedi, but that's a whole other...
that's another
That's a whole other podcast.
What about you going to do anything special? IMAX, 70 millimeter, 3D, any of that stuff? Or are you just going straight 2D?
Just 2D. I hate 3D. I've never liked 3D at all. It seems gimmicky to me. And my eyes are a little crossed, so it doesn't work out well for me.
Yeah. Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah,
inside
yeah.
story.
Well, that's one to grow on.
Yeah. How about you, Will? You got tickets yet? And if not, or if so, what are you looking? How are you going to go see that?
No, I hate to be that guy, but I think I'm less excited about the movie than you two are. Not because I don't love Ready Player One, but I think it's for the opposite reason, right? I mean, my favorite book of all time is probably Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. And I got super stoked about the movie coming out. And then when I watched it, I was like,
yeah, you and me both on that one.
Yeah, they just ruined the potential of some really good sequels. So for me, I'm cautiously optimistic. So I haven't got my tickets yet. I am with Mike that 3D is not a thing. I mean, mathematically, it's just a reduction in resolution, right? That's what the offset is there. You're just minimizing the number of pixels on target by splitting them in half. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I'm actually going on March 28th, so a day before. They're doing a kind of a special showing downtown here in Austin at the Ritz, which is an Alamo Drafthouse Theater. And it's so bizarre. It's a 70 millimeter screening. I don't know of many episodes or shows being on the 28th. I'm praying. I've got my fingers crossed, my toes crossed. I'm hoping that we may get a special appearance from Ernie Klein at that particular showing, but hey, if we don't, that's okay too. But so I'll be there on the 28th. It's a 70 millimeter, like I said, I thought I chose to do that just because I'd like to do the IMAX. I probably am going to do the 35 millimeter. And depending on how I come out of the movie, I may just do the 3D because it doesn't really bother me one way or the other. It's not my first choice or even my second choice, but just to kind of round out the whole block and say that I've done all of them, I may go that route.
I've noticed something here in the last 2 shows that we've done. I think you're stalking Ernie. I don't really want. I just have that feeling.
The signs are everywhere, but I don't want to admit that publicly. That's true.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually was surprised you didn't know where he was going to be that evening.
Exactly.
I find it difficult to believe you don't.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on. So this is some kind of cool news for at least for me and probably Mike and Will, to be fair. So we had originally heard a couple weeks ago that Star Wars would not be making it into Ready Player One as a reference, and just recently at South by Southwest, Steven Spielberg was asked whether or not this was true, and he kind of went on to say that Star Wars is indeed going to be referenced in Ready Player One. Now, I won't give any spoilers because, again, we'll only be a few days out, and I don't want to do that on the show. So that's good news, at least that it's in there. I don't think from what I understand, it's not to the extent of the Star Wars references because they were kind of hot and heavy, and we got quite a few of them in the book. But my understanding is that it is referenced, but we're probably not going to see the same level of content, Star Wars content, that we saw in the book that we do in the movie. So, Mike, any thoughts there? How do you feeling about having Star Wars back in there after we had thought it was ripped out?
Well, I'm actually very happy about this because it's part of the culture of the 80s. Like, that was still a big thing in the 80s, Return of the Jedi and everything. And it's like the elephant in the room. If you don't reference it, it's like, not even having Back to the Future referenced in the movie and stuff. So
yeah, we're a Steven Spielberg movie for that
pretty
matter.
much. Yeah. So I'm very excited about it. I think that's pretty cool. I don't know what level it'll be. I assume it's like in the background, like images and stuff. And it's funny because I think in the image that they showed early on, like a teaser image, there was a Star Wars poster in the background. So I assumed that it would happen. And then we heard no, and now we're hearing yes, which I'm glad. It's funny because I'm still in the middle of Armada, and that's heavier in the Star Wars references than this here. So, and that's supposed to become a movie as well, which will be interesting how they pull that off. But yeah, I'm happy about it. It's good. It's I'm looking forward to it. It'll make me happy because it's the old Star Wars that I grew up on, and it wasn't this disaster that Rian Johnson did. So it'll be great.
Jeez, that's too. All right. So, Will, anything that you'd like to go ahead and make a prediction about in terms of Star Wars being in Ready Player One?
Well, first of all, let it be known that Steven Spielberg cannot keep a secret. That's just not. It's not his wheelhouse. So I'm not sure that you can blame me for spoiler alerts here. If Steven Spielberg is already telling us what's going to be in the film and what's not. Right. So, I agree with Mike in the sense that you can't make this film without Star Wars. You just couldn't have, and I think that was one of the reasons I was cautiously optimistic about the film, because if you're going to make a film like this that is so heavy and so reliant on pop culture and the number of Star Wars references that are in the books and not have it, it would I guess it'd be like making Titanic without the iceberg.
Which might be a pretty good movie, to be honest.
That might be a good movie. Yeah, and we won't talk about this tonight, but Rush is another one that was pretty big in the novel. In fact, there's an entire chapter, almost 2 chapters fully, that kind of reference it. And we know that's not going to be in the movie, so I was heartbroken by that. But we'll get to that at some point down the road.
Well, it's better than Oingo Boingo, I'll say that. But
yeah, well.
Yeah. He's a bigger Rush fan than Oingo Boingo fan.
Yeah,
that's
definitely
the only
a bigger
thing that
Rush
saves
fan.
him right now is that right there.
All right. So, and keeping on topic with South by Southwest. So the reviews are out. I don't know if you guys have had a chance. I've, most of them have been just fans that have gotten a chance to see it from South by South. And there's some top critics now on Rotten Tomatoes, but overall, I'm going to this is not the critics review, and there's a whole nother show that we could do on the importance or the earnest of Rotten Tomatoes. But so far, all the people that are coming out of the show seem to like it and seem to be kind of raving about it. So, Mike, any thoughts there? How are you feeling about have you had a chance to look at some of those reviews? And if so, what are your first impressions of that?
Well, I'll say this. Rotten Tomatoes is very accurate with The Last Jedi. But anyway, as far as the initial reviews when it comes to Ready Player One, I'm feeling pretty optimistic. I mean, I'm cautious because I think, as we were saying in the Discord channel for the Cantina Cast, when we were going back and forth with it, I think as long as the spirit of the book is there, I'll be happy. Now, can they pull it off? That's the bigger question. I think they will. So I just have to see for myself to go in. And I'll say this, it's like The Walking Dead, which is a nightmare that I've been living for the last 8 years going on with that thing. I don't even know why I'm still watching, but the writing is horrible.
Me neither.
Yeah,
you're too deep in the game.
Exactly.
We're too deep in the game.
I just can't get out of it. So, and they initially weren't following the comic, and then they started following the comic too much to the T. There's no mystery there. So I think not going exactly by the book is a good thing here. I mean, you can't really pull off what was in the book on film. You can't just have a carbon copy. That would be boring, and I don't think you wouldn't be surprised, right? You'd know it exactly. So I don't know. I'm very excited. Like we said in Discord, I think as long as the spirit of the movie keeps in line with the book, I think we'll be fine, and we'll be overloaded with pop culture references to get over the bad parts, I guess. So I'm pretty optimistic.
And will the reviews, those do anything for you for going into a movie?
Yeah, I've read a few of the reviews, and I don't know. Maybe it was just ones I randomly clicked because I wasn't going in any particular order over the Rotten Tomatoes, but it did seem like those that were negative toward the film, was more about unlike the book, because there are just so many references to get into the movie.
Yeah,
that some of them feel like they were thrown as an afterthought, or they didn't do the punchline for example, the holy hand grenade is featured in the movie, but they don't do the payoff that you would know if you were a Monty Python fan, that kind of stuff. But, ultimately, if it holds true to the spirit of the book, I think we're going to be in good shape.
Yep, I would agree. And that's I posted something this week, I think, or last week on Instagram, where I had mentioned that, even though I think there's a scene that's out now where we've got Rexy from Jurassic Park rampaging through the streets, attacking, vehicles. It looks like H is driving the Bigfoot from the 80s, the big monster truck. So all of that obviously is not in the book. But I think what I had posted was that, between Ernie Klein and Zach Penn, given that those are the two guys that got together, they wrote the screenplay, I think the spirit of the book is going to be intact. I don't think we need to worry about anything there, but definitely seems like we're in for some pretty big sweeping changes, and probably for the best if you think about it. Just trying to convert something like the novel to a book, I'd always wondered how they were going to do it and how they'd pull it off and whether it would translate really well to a movie. And I guess the answer is that no, and hopefully we'll get a better ending there, or better outcome there. And then lastly, our last bit of news, and we can make this quick. I just wanted to point out that we got our first track from the Alan Silverstreet soundtrack, Ready Player One main title, and all of the track listings, at least at the time of this recording, are available out there. You can't listen to any of the songs but that one. But my first impressions were it was okay. It was better than I expected. And I say that with all due respect to Mr. Silverstreet, only because, no one tops John Williams. And John Williams is just notable for so many great 70s and 80s and even 90s, even to this day, having these main theme songs that have these catchy tunes, right? Things that are so easily identifiable, recognizable, these little bits and movements from the main title. And I was really worried about this movie going into it that we wouldn't get that. I was surprised that even after I played it just once for my kids, we were actually going to church of all times to play that. But we were on our way to church, and I played the song, and they listened to it twice, and I had just shut it off because we were getting close to it, and two of the boys were humming it. So it at least stuck in their minds. And it sounds, for me, it's catchy enough. It's probably not, it's not Jurassic Park. It's not Star Wars. It's not Close Encounters of the Third Kind, but it was enough for me to go, okay, yeah, I can see where we've got a little catchy tune here. So, Will, how about you? Have you had a chance to listen to the song? Any initial impressions on that?
Yeah, I do think that if Alan was here, he would punch you in the face, because it's not like he hasn't actually made some really good soundtracks during his time.
Better than Oingo Boingo.
He's second class.
Yeah, he's no Oingo Boingo.
He's no Danny Elfman.
He is not. But hey, he did do the Back to the Future soundtrack, and he did that, Romancing the Stone. He did a number of early '80s film. Hey, Who Framed Roger Rabbit? That's a winner right there. So if you Flight of the Navigator, I was just looking over this list. Come on.
Hey, Flight of the Navigator is a great movie.
Sure it is.
How about Mike? Have you had a chance to listen to the song?
I do like that movie, by the way. So I guess it's time to pick on me for a change.
Yeah, well, right.
But I'll say this: I downloaded the track. I actually listened to it last week before we went on air. I was getting pumped up and stuff, and I like it. I think it does what it needs to do. I was just surprised that the CD isn't available, or to download or whatever, until April 6th, which is weird to me, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's so far away from when the movie
exactly.
releases.
And because I got Apple Music, and I just do that now, and I got the main theme, and it's great. I like it. I listen to it once a day, but I'm like, I want to hear what else is on the track. Like, I don't have, I'm like, come on, this is going to be a killer soundtrack if all goes the way I think it's going to go. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be one of the few soundtracks I actually purchase or listen to.
Great. All right, well, let's do this. Let's move on to our main show where we're going to wrap up the prologue. And I just want to quickly start with a recap of the last episode. We kind of ended right at the start of Anorak's invitation, which, by the way, we didn't really talk about this, but Anorak is a British slang term for someone that's obsessed with niche subjects. I guess it would be the equivalent of like geek or nerd here in the U.S. or like otaku, which is, Japanese, but for, kids are obsessed or people that are obsessed with like video games and video game culture. That was not something, to be fair. I actually looked that up later on after I had read the book. Initially, when I read the book, I just thought Anorak was a cool sounding, medieval name that he had come up with, but there is some background there. But anyways, he had just popped up and we started we got to see him dancing. We talked about 80s music, and then we ended on Oingo Boingo, which was a great way to end that that last show. And we did skip over one part. We didn't mention Heathers, and there's a reason why. So just one last thing before we kind of dive into this. But with Heathers, for those of you that are listeners to the show already, we've also working on a bonus level or bonus stage episode, I think is what I'm calling it. Kind of a throwback to Street Fighter 2. But for the bonus stage episode, what we're going to do is kind of take some of these. We obviously can't hit all the references, but I thought I'd like to do something maybe for our Patreon users. So we've got a Patreon page that's up. It's available now, and what I'm hoping to do is kind of record some special content for that. In that first episode, I'd like to cover Heathers, the John Hughes movies. We'll talk about the Apple II, the Commodore 64, that kind of thing. And then we'll probably do those bonus stage episodes probably once a month. So kind of look forward to that. No immediate plans to get that anytime soon. I even thought about trying to mix in some of the guests and change up the guests for those shows. So look for that. And that's kind of why that's some context there as to why we didn't cover Heathers. So going on, the gymnasium scene ends. It fades to black. And now we're kind of in front of this funeral parlor with the same younger Halliday standing in front of the older Halliday who's in a casket. And it's one of the quick references that I wanted to talk about was he mentions that there's two quarters that are sitting on the eyes of the old Halliday, and the quarters were minted in 1984. And obviously, quarters were what we use for arcade games, and most games were 25 cents. And if you really found some back then, at least that were 50 cents, it was a little pricey. But when I read this part, for some reason, I thought that this was just a common thing for the dead, that that this is people that were buried a long time ago and whatever religion or culture would have these quarters put on their eyes. And it wasn't until I kind of started doing some research on it that I found out that there really weren't a whole lot of cultures that did this and that the quarters were actually buried in their mouth. But the one thing that it did make me think of was the 1981 movie Clash of the Titans, because what was supposed to happen is you'd put these quarters in the mouth or on the eyes of, and when they died and they got to the River Styx, they would have to give these quarters to Charon, the ferryman, who would then take you across the River Styx and take you into the outer world. So I thought this would be a great segue to kind of talk about Clash of the Titans, even though it's not part of Ready Player One. It is, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me, William's wife's favorite movie of all time. So William, I'm going to kick it over to you. What did you think when you read this, and how familiar are you with the Charon, the ferryman, and Clash of the Titans there?
Sir, do not threaten my nerdness. Of course, I know Greek mythology and Charon the ferryman. And you are correct. My wife actually led the petition to have Clash of the Titans pushed to DVD and was given a free copy of the DVD when it was released.
Get out of here. Are you kidding me?
No, seriously. She's now officially on the 4K kick. Got to get it in 4K.
Right.
Mark's not going to look better
Nothing
than he
looks
ever
better.
will.
Stop animation doesn't look better and look good until you've seen it in 4K.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So, I think the same thing. When I read that section, I was thinking relatively the same thing, because I think they were making two statements about our generation that was playing video games and how you would be passing on into the afterlife, that you would still need those two quarters. I don't know.
Yeah, right. And I got you there. Mike, did this stick out for you at all when you read this part?
Not really. I mean, the only listening to everyone talk now, it only makes me think of like all those, I guess, medieval or Greek mythology movies that we kind of grew up in the 80s. They all kind of had, in my mind right now, like they all had a scene. I think even Beastmaster had one with the when they paid a ferryman to take him across the river. If I'm remembering right, I could be misremembering if that's even a word, and stuff like that. So I'm just thinking back to all those movies that I once watched where like they kind of all blur like a Dungeons and Dragons type of thing. It's all, at some point this happened in the movie or whatever. But no, this didn't really stick out at me other than, it seemed like he was still attached to playing video games, even maybe in the afterlife, like kind of with the quarters on his eyes so he could play one last game or something up in heaven or something. I don't know. That's kind of how I took it. Not that that's really what it was meant to be, but it didn't do much. This actually didn't do too much. But even the whole Heathers thing with the funeral and that didn't do that much to me. It just made me think of the movie, and that was about it.
Well, so let's talk about that, because the next part of the book kind of it mentions that the mourners at the funeral are the cast members from Heathers, and like I said, we'll probably break down the movie Heathers in the bonus episode or the bonus stage episode. But just real quickly, have either of you guys seen Heathers? Oh, yeah. And if so, any quick thoughts on the movie? And Mike, let's just start with you since you were kind of talking about it here.
I just remember liking it, and I thought it was intriguing and rather weird. But like someone that was young, my age, watching it and then seeing this whole thing play out, and I was like, that's a little interesting and dark. And I was attracted to it because it was kind of dark in a way. So I don't know, it wasn't bad. It wasn't something that just actually I forgot about it until it came up in the book, and then I had forgotten about it for a while. So it's been so long. How
about you? Have you had a chance to see Heathers recently, or what's your memory of that movie?
I think I saw Heathers about a year ago. And I recall it being the first movie where I thought Christian Slater was channeling Jack Nicholson. Like where I thought, well, this guy's going to be Jack Nicholson of our generation. He's got the eyebrows thing going, and he talks like him.
And he was always compared to him in most of his movies. Like I remember that from the 80s when he was out, that he was going to be that next Jack Nicholson for the reasons you said there. So I think it stuck with him for a pretty long time in his career.
Right. It was and it's odd. Like if you look at the plot of Heathers, you just wonder what, was Ernest trying to make a correlation between the life of the lead character and the character of Veronica and Heathers? Because we'll probably deeper dive into it when we talk about Heathers at length. But I mean, I think if you look at the evolution of those two characters and the arc of that character in Heathers, from beginning to end, wanting to be one of the popular kids, wanting to be Heather, and then eventually like breaking away from that and not wanting to be that at all, was similar to how I felt they were painting the character throughout Ready Player One, throughout the prologue.
Yeah. I mean, personally for me, I think it's actually a really, really good dark comedy, but wow. I mean, looking back at it now, I mean, I thought it was dark for its time. And, given what's been going on like in society today with all the school shootings and violence, I don't know that you could get away with a movie like this. Maybe you could. There's always a market for anything out there. Human Centipede. But that said, I mean, I don't even, if you guys have a chance to see, but this movie is getting turned into a television series. So Paramount Network, they're set to release this TV show that's based on the movie. It's got all the same concept. I think one of the Heathers is now a male that identifies as a female. But one of the things that was really interesting, that TV show was supposed to come out in March of this year. But since then, they've delayed it in light of the Stoneman Douglas school shooting. So, I don't know. I saw the trailer. I went and looked at the trailer for the TV show, and I found myself chuckling, and I don't know why, because it's certainly not something that would be attracted, I'd be attracted to in my old age at this point. But
it kind of reminds me of 13 Reasons Why. Like that show that you just met, like Heathers, the TV show, kind of reminds me of similar to that. I mean, granted, it's a person committing suicide or whatever. It's not really exactly. Well, I guess it is kind of the same thing, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's that dark kind of. That I think that it's a little bit more serious. It's not meant to be a dark comedy, which Heathers was. So I don't know. I'd be curious to see what it's like, but I to be honest, I'd rather go just see what the original Heathers was like, just to refresh my memory and be like, oh, okay. Because it's been so long.
Yeah, it's actually a really good. I mean, and you guys can shoot me down for this, but it actually really is a good movie. Like even when I saw it back then, it wasn't one of those movies that I was anticipating being very good. And I mean, it's probably been a couple of years since I've seen it, but I mean, I think the last time I did catch it, I remember going back and going, wow, a movie that I probably will watch once every 20, 25, 30 years. But it's not bad. It wasn't too bad. All right, well, let's move on to talking about the legal scroll. So at this point, there's a legal scroll that comes up. Halliday starts explaining what the reward is for winning the contest, and the scene changes again. And this time, we get a bank vault door, and he mentions that there's, basically he is his entire estate and fortune are up for stake or for grabs here. Whoever wins it, if they should want it or get it from the contest winnings, they get full control share stock of GSS. And then all in, he mentions that it's $240 billion, which seems like a lot of money today. And I imagine that's still a lot of money in 2040.
I'll take it.
I'll
take it. The 240. Yeah, I could do a lot of podcasting with that. But
yeah. And then this is where we get our first reference to Gregarious Simulation Systems, GSS, which for me, when I read that, I immediately related it to, I don't know if you guys recall Strategic Simulations Incorporated, SSI, but they were a computer software manufacturer. And I mean, I have very vivid memories of, playing on a Trash 80, an Apple IIe, my Commodore 64. Those games, when I saw that logo, that was something that I knew I really wanted to play. And they made it really big by selling like combat simulation type games. And eventually what really kind of took it for me and what won it for me was about the mid 80s when they got the Dungeons and Dragons license from TSR. And so they cranked out a ton of Dungeons and Dragons games for that. I went back and I just tried to look as in show prep, trying to find out if this was really what he was going for here by calling it GGS. And when you read about the company here and a little bit later on, it almost sounds very similar to SSI. I couldn't find anything definitive that said, yep, Ernie Klein, this is exactly where his inspiration was. But I did notice there are a number of people out there that actually created this logo to look very similar to the SSI logo, which is it's very unique. It stands out. If you've ever seen it, it never leaves your memory kind of thing. But I thought it was very interesting that I wasn't the only one that kind of put those two together. So Mike, I'll go with you first. Are you familiar with SSI? And did you ever play any of the games on there? Anything that stood out for you there?
I'm familiar with it, but I never I played the Commodore 64. We didn't play the Apple II or anything like that. My brother had the Commodore 64, and we played that. I can't remember exactly because I was younger than him. I just remember playing these simulation type games, well, more like the RPGs or whatever. And this stupid vampire game I can't get out of my head. But I remember seeing this thing, and I remember it. I just can't really place it because this didn't jump out at me in the book, the GSS. I thought of the ISS, the space station, for some stupid reason. So this didn't really jump out at me, other than the 240 billion. That kind of, jumped out at me. But I remember playing the games. I just don't remember who did what. I was too young. All I cared about was really playing the game so much with my brother. We kind of teamed up and stuff, and I helped him as going through it and stuff. So it wasn't anything that stuck out at me, really.
Yeah. So, one of the so for the listeners, maybe something that I don't know if we've mentioned yet, but you are an NES fanatic. I don't know if you got a better word for that, but you're one of the few people that I know that has. Let me ask: do you have every NES game at this point?
I have every NTSC release complete in box.
Box booklet.
Complete in box, and every cover variant of every NTSC release.
All right, so that's one of the main reasons I asked you to be on here. But with that, did SSI do any of the NES games, or was that licensed through someone else?
No, they did 3 of them, right? So they did obviously the Dungeons and Dragons releases. And when you see GSS the first time, I thought the same thing. I'm not even sure that you need that to be validated anywhere. I mean, if you just look at the types of games that SSI released at their peak, well, actually throughout the 80s, I mean, they're the first ones to do immersive role-playing games, right? So whether you're, probably the most popular in the AD&D series are Heroes of the Lance and Hills Far, that were released on the NES toward the latter part of its career in 88 and 89, respectively. But if you look through their list of games that they did for everything for, Mac, including the PS1, they were still doing like Allied General and some of those. They really specialized in immersive, strategic, period piece games, which was kind of unique for the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for me, that particular logo. So when I think back to computer games on floppy disks and that sort of thing, the SSI logo stood out for me. Electronic Arts was another big one, and no, we everybody knows Electronic Arts today. I get that, right? They're huge and they're absolutely almost nothing like they were back then. But that logo meant something. When you saw an Electronic Arts game, you knew you were in for something pretty special at the time. Infocom was another one. Whenever you saw that logo, at least on the boxes of those computer games for like the C64 and that sort of thing, you knew you were getting something special. But those three were kind of the big ones that stood out for me growing up. But yeah, I mean, you're probably right. I mean, it's so apparent, it's in your face that this is probably where he got it from. I just maybe at some point in part of my stalking, I'll have a chance to ask him whether or not that was true, and I'll come back and let you guys know how that goes. So we get the first reference of GSS, and then we get to see inside the vault, which he mentions there's gold bars the size of a house, which is kind of a cool little visual. And we get our first reference here. He says, "What the hell? You can't take it with you, right?" Now, I don't know for 100% or whether this is a reference or not, a pop culture reference, but it stood out to me because there was a play called "You Can't Take It With You" that was made into movies and that kind of thing. And I don't want to go off on a tangent here or get too personal, but Will, didn't we do this in high school, or wasn't this something that we did? Didn't we do like a scene or something from "You Can't Take It With You"?
Yeah, so I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we did was it a summer theater program where we did a bunch of little vignettes of different period plays, and you and I did the "You Can't Take It With You" piece. But yeah, there's to be clear, Albert, there's no way that's
sure?
what he was. I'm 100% positive. I can't, I'm pretty good at conspiracy theories. I can't find a link to a play written that long ago.
That's fair. I mean, I saw it and it stood out to me. I think it was mostly because of the high school theater arts days or whatnot. But it's funny because I started looking at some of the references, or at least all the different variations of "You Can't Take It With You." It started off as a play. It had like Jimmy Stewart in there. It had Mr. Barrymore, Lionel Barrymore. They ended up doing the play before that won like a Pulitzer prize for it. And then it's funny because there's some versions that came out later, and I don't have all of this in front of me. I should have put it up, but they did another version like in the 70s, and they did another. I think there was almost like a TV series or something that came out. But it's through all of it, there's all these different people that were in it that went on to do really famous TV shows in the 70s and 80s. And in fact, we had like B. Arthur was in one of them, I think, at one point. So we got her from Maude and from the Star Wars Holiday Special. So Mike,
why would you bring that up? But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I know that's a big one for you. But that it's actually a really, really good comedy. If you get a chance to see it, whether it's the play or any one of the variations of the movies. I watched a clip from the 70s movie, and it actually was pretty good. It had some, it was very dated, obviously, but it's actually a pretty good play, and a cool storyline. I want to say it's probably one of the first pieces that we're in arts. We're introduced to these very eccentric kind of characters that you kind of see stereotyped now through just about every genre of media that's out there. So, all right. So we'll kind of scratch that one and say that this wasn't an actual movie reference, but I'd like to think it was. So, moving on, we got, he snaps his fingers, and then we're taken back to Halliday in 1980, and he's wearing a Muppet Show t-shirt. So let's break into Muppets just for a little bit here and kind of talk about that. I threw some, as far as the homework, I'd ask you guys to kind of watch season 1 if you could. If not, watch some episodes and kind of, rekindle the spirit there and get a good understanding of what was going on in those shows. But Mike, did you get a chance to watch any of these shows, and just what were your initial impressions as you were watching through those?
Well, I watched them several times as a youngster. I'll leave it at that. But I can remember quite a bit because I remember obviously when when Mark Hamill was on there, and stuff like that. And it just it was, and you got in your notes, does it hold up the test of time? I've seen clips throughout, because you reminisce, you go back on YouTube, and everything's on YouTube and stuff. And I watched the stuff with Mark Hamill, and I think it does. It was interesting because I think back to when I was a kid and you had all those variety shows as a kid, and the Muppets kind of stood around longer than most, I think, if I remember right. They were around for quite a bit, and I love the show. I always used to watch it, and then I'd have to go to bed after the Muppet Show, which was really sad for me. And my favorite one is, of course, Animal is my favorite Muppet. How could you not love that guy? But,
Right.
but I do think it holds up. I don't know if like my kid would be into it now because it's not like the people that are on that show. Like she would get Mark Hamill because obviously Star Wars, but some of those actors and actresses are long gone or whatever it may be. I don't know if it would hold up now, but I know
Yeah.
they tried to reboot the Muppet Show in a way, and that didn't work. I don't know. The Muppets seem like they can't get a foothold nowadays for some reason. And I also remember Muppet Babies too, as well. That was
Well, let's talk about that in just a minute. I will come back to that because I do want to get into some of the spinoffs and the cartoons and some of that stuff. But Will, for you, did you guys watch this growing up? And if so, what was your level of viewing there? Were you guys diehard fans, or was it a casual thing for y'all?
Well, I mean, remember this is the early '80s, so there wasn't a lot of children targeted programming outside of Channel 9 and then the Saturday morning cartoons. So for us to have the Muppet Show as a primetime event was a big deal for us, right? I mean, you had to watch it. For me, I guess if I were looking at who I thought was the best character, I think I'd probably go with Statler. Those
The
guys
old
are,
dudes.
yeah, the old dudes from the balcony. In fact, as I age, I'm slowly turning into those
exactly.
guys.
I relate to them more than any other.
Statler and
Yes.
Waldorf.
Wardrobe. There you go.
That's going to be Will and I by the end of we get to this.
Yeah,
by the time we
by the
finish
this is where this is
yeah.
going.
Yeah, by the time
That's
we
right.
finish this book, that's going to be us.
And
We'll
then,
be laughing.
yeah, and then Albert's just gonzo on the stage.
Yep,
Or
hitting the
just-
gong, blowing the trumpet. Yeah. So for me, so this is definitely a show that was watched at our house. In fact, I know this is one of the few shows that we would gather as a family because Dad really wasn't. I mean, he had his show. He watched MASH and Barney Miller and some
Solid
of these
Gold,
older
for
programs.
sure. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but that was for different reasons.
I know those reasons.
Yeah. But yeah, he would watch those shows, and so like his TV viewing and my TV viewing never crossed. But this was one of the times that I do have fond memories of sitting down with Mom, with Dad, and watching the Muppet Show because it was just one of those shows that I think there was enough in there for everyone. It was appealing to kids, but for me, it was really about the Muppets. And when I watch these shows now, they probably don't have as many jokes that are really aimed towards adults, but it's certainly it's available to adults to kind of consume at a different level than kids, which is good, right? I mean, that's kind of what you'd want if you're really aiming for a variety show. And given I think Mike, you mentioned it, there were so many variety shows that were out, in the 70s and the 80s. But this one, along with like the Donnie Marie Osmond Show, was another one that was pretty popular with, the Padilla household. Sonny and Cher, I vaguely remember that. I was pretty young when that came out, but I think in syndication, that was another one that I do have fond memories of. The Carol Burnett Show was another one that was really big at the time. You had the Brady Bunch Hour, and then the other one that I remember Dad wanted to watch, again, probably for sketchy reasons, was the Barbara Mandrell Show and the Mandrell Sisters. Did you guys ever watch that one?
No, I don't think I watched that one, but
No, I definitely didn't watch that one.
Yeah, so this is at their prime, obviously, and they did have a prime. I don't want to we shouldn't dispute that. They did have a prime at some point, and they had a variety show that was out. But I think given the Muppet Show and where it stood against all of those, it definitely was one of the standout variety shows at the time. Did you guys watch any other variety shows? Anything that stood out for you there in terms of that kind of television during the 70s or 80s?
I don't know. Because I remember, like you, I would sit around with my mom and my dad, and we'd watch, and even my brother and my sister, and we'd watch the Muppets. Because that was like the one time we kind of all got together and watched it in those early days.
Yeah.
And then it was, off to bed for me. My brother and the sister stood up a little longer, but yeah, I remember my father actually enjoyed it. He thought it was funny and stuff. I don't know why, which is weird because he's not into anything like he's not Star Wars or anything like that. It's like, hey, that's a kid's thing. But he found the Muppets to be pretty enjoyable. It was something for everybody, and I think there were those jokes that went over our heads, and the adults could kind of get it and laugh and everything. A bit of everything for everybody, I really think, because they did have some big name stars come on that show. It wasn't just like some B-list actor coming on. It was like a pretty big deal coming on the show. It was a pretty cool thing to do, and I think it outlasted, if I remember right, all those other shows that you said. I could be wrong. I'm just kind of going up from what.
I mean, it had a pretty good run. I think it was like at least 4 or 5 years. I know there was a season 4. I don't remember if there was a season 5. There may have been, but I mean, it's a pretty decent run, all things considered. And we won't get into all of the origins, but I mean, this was a hard sell for Jim Henson when he tried to bring it here to the U.S. I mean, he was kind of turned down, and he ended up kind of packing up, almost, literally packed up and went to the UK, where he finally got somebody to kind of say yes and sign a bunch of money over to him to put the show on. But yeah, it was a hard sell for him initially, and it turned into one of these things where, like you said, there were actors that were waiting to get onto the show. They were begging to get onto the show because of its popularity, and what it did for them, personally, and their fame and their fortune, that kind of thing. So it led to some, bigger and better things, or just, exposure for some of these actors and actresses that maybe didn't get the screen time that or the limelight that they were deserving at the time. So what about Will? Did you guys watch any other variety shows at the time?
No, I can't remember. That wasn't like a popular genre over at our house, especially in the 80s. It seemed like everything, if something wasn't blowing up, we probably weren't going to go out, or it didn't have Alf in it. If it didn't meet one of those criteria.
If it wasn't Alf, Knight Rider, the A-Team, those
something,
kind of
cars must jump,
yeah,
helicopters must shoot things. It's got to be
Hulk.
Right in that way. Yeah, we got to have all of that. Airwolf.
Oh, Airwolf. Oh,
yep.
Be still my heart.
Airwolf. There was a Blue Thunder too. They did a TV show for that.
Oh yeah, Blue Thunder. I forgot after the movie.
Yeah.
Yep. After the movie, Roy
With
Schneider.
the dude from Jaws.
Roy Schneider. Yep. So going back to the Muppets, so there's one thing I wanted to touch on were the segments, because for me, so the Muppet Show it had, we had the guests on there, and they would kind of do these one-off, singing or dancing or performing, or just these sketches, this kind of sketch comedy stuff. But the thing that I really looked forward to wasn't real, with the exception of Mark Campbell.
The offstage stuff was always the best, I thought.
Yeah, the offstage stuff was good in the background when, with Scooter and those guys talking about stuff. That was always funny. And Kermit, and how he was always trying
Get
to
the show,
keep the guests happy and keep everything going right, keep the lights on literally at times. Those were always cool. But the segments is what I want to kind of focus on. So there were a few that stood out for me, like at the dance, where they had the ballroom and everybody was dancing, and it was that same music, da 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 da, that kind of thing. And then they'd cut over, and you'd get the worst one-liner, like dad jokes in between there.
Probably why my father liked it, but
And yeah, and me, when I was watching some of these episodes in prep for the show, I was cracking up because and I'm like writing these things down because I'm like, these are great jokes that I liked as a kid, and I know my kids would like. And I'm a big scout leader. I'd like to use these for the kids as well, the scouts. So it was super corny, but they were just funny enough that they stood out. Do you guys remember Sam the Eagle?
Oh, I love
his
Sam
editorials?
the Eagle. Oh yeah, I love him.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I mean, that was like great political humor for the time, and just the dryness and what we got from like news media at the time. It was a sign of the times and how news was delivered, and I think they did a really good job kind of doing a parody of that. I remember the Electric Mayhem and Dr. Teeth skit. That was always cool. There was always some kind of cool music going on. The Gonzo stunts, Muppet Labs, of course, I think, which came out later with Beaker and
Bunsen,
Professor Bunsen.
Yeah, I think it's Bunsen. I think it's Bunsen and Beaker.
Someone's going to kill us for not remembering that.
Well, hey, it's been years. I mean, what the heck?
It's been years. Yeah,
that's right.
Muppet Newsflash is another one.
That's a good one.
That's a great segment. Pigs in Space.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think we did this on the Cantina cast. What did we
reference?
Was it Whales in Space or something? I don't know. I made the joke on the show one time.
And maybe you and I got it. I think that's it. Everyone else didn't get it.
Right. No one else got it. No one else over the age of 25 got that joke, or under the age of 25. Wayne and Wanda, which were the loving couple. That was a good one. Veterinarian's Hospital, which was obviously a huge take on General Hospital, which was enormous at the time.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that was usually Ralph was the doctor for the surgeon, if I'm not mistaken. The Swedish Chef, we can't leave him out.
No, he was great.
Oh no,
that was always kind of creepy to me too, because he had the real hands, and all the other Muppets didn't have real hands. And then of course Statler and Waldorf. So we kind of talked about them. If I could, my favorite character though. So I thought about this a lot because Muppets it had a huge impact on my life, to be honest. I think I wanted to go with like Kermit and Fozzie just because they were the original bromance, original bros. And Swedish Chef stood out for me. But I think honestly,
Piggy.
and you guys, no. There was a character by the name of New Zealand. Do you guys remember New Zealand?
No.
So,
Yeah. Are you not just being that guy, right? Where you
no,
pick the most obscure character and you're like,
absolutely not.
I don't know if you guys have heard.
You go. So you guys are. If you guys get a chance, go to my social media, my personal social media page. Look at my profile pics, and you will see that I've used this many times before in the past. But New Zealand is the guy that throws the fish, the boomerang fish.
Yeah, I remember.
I don't know what it was. I think for me it was because he sounded like Tommy Chong. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but his voice and the way he spoke. But then the fact that he wore the most ridiculous outfit, he had the most ridiculous hair. You know, he had huge buggy eyes, and he threw fish that were boomerang fish. I mean, it was just so far out there that it was something, I don't know what it was, but it was just, that was the character that I'd always look forward to. And he is kind of a smaller character. He's not obviously, they're not making shows about him or episodes about him. He was just kind of a bit
I thought you were going to go with Sweetums. The big monster guy. I thought you were going to go with him.
Oh, no. That was a great puppet, though, or I don't know if that's the right word to use.
Well, that's what they are. They are puppets.
I think, no, they're Muppets. They're not puppets. It's the whole thing. It's right there in the name, people.
I think, wasn't there an episode where they, like the new episode where Kermit got mad about that or something? I could be wrong, but I thought there was. But anyway.
Maybe.
I don't know. The new episodes, I thought Pepe the King Prawn was the best in the new episodes. I don't know if you've seen any of those.
Yeah, he actually is good. Like it, and it's so like his mouth is just so one dimensional. I mean, it just opens and closes. There's like no articulation whatsoever, but it works. It's like hilarious to hear him talk. So let's talk just a little bit more, and we'll kind of move on. But I want to talk about the movies and the sequels. And
of the Muppets?
Yeah. So did any of the movies stand out for you guys? Any of the sequel movies, or the movie itself, or any of the sequels thereafter? And there's a ton of them. So we're not going to get into all of them or anything. But anything that stood out for you?
I think the Christmas Carol was good. Muppet Babies. Yeah. Saturday morning cartoons. So that was always, it was on. So I was big into that. But I liked them all. I remember the first one when I went to the theater. I loved that one, and it still comes out. My daughter watches that when it comes on. I forget what it comes on. I think Disney or whatever. It comes on that because I think Disney owns them now, right? I believe so. So
yeah, they do.
They own everything. Do. So before you know it, they'll own Star Trek, and then they'll be crossing the streams, and that won't be good. But anyway, but yeah, I never had a problem with any of them, really.
Yeah. How about you? Well, any of the movies? Or the spin-off TV shows, cartoons, any of that stuff?
Yeah, so we're at Disney. I remember our first trip to Disney, and I was trying to explain to the kids who Emmett Otter's Jug Band was, because they had never seen Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas. So it was.
And that was a staple for us as kids growing up. I mean, that you look forward to that every Christmas year.
Yeah, you had to. But I will say this. So I remember in the early 90s, I won't date myself, but the Muppets were releasing a new movie. And my wife and I were with our youngest daughter. It was to be her first time in a movie theater. And we thought, this is going to be great. We're going to go watch a Muppets film. She's going to love it. So we get into the theater. They turn off the lights. She's still cool with it. And then I want to say the movie opens with a huge beaker, like right on the screen. And she just starts screaming and runs out of the theater. And that was the first trip she ever made to the theater. It was about 12 and a half seconds.
Yeah, right. So for me, I think, so I remember the movie pretty fondly, the original movie, and it scared the bejesus out of me. At that time, I was like 6 years old. And there was something about the frog legs. I mean, the whole thing was kind of creepy, and it had the 70s. And I shouldn't say that. That's not fair. But a lot of the stuff that came out in the 70s, like this, and I won't throw it up there with Mr. Yuck, but it was one of those things that
Mr. Yuck. Those were great commercials.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. But it was just something. There was something weird, right? And I don't know if it was the whole, psychedelic. We were coming off the psychedelic era. Or we had, whatever it was. But it was something about the frog legs and that whole bit that it was just terrified me as a kid. So I didn't really have too fond memories of that. I mean, the song is pretty catchy. I won't make William sing it, but I've heard him sing it before. He does a really good rendition of Kermit the Frog singing Rainbow Connection.
It was a great song.
He's the only one that should ever sing that song. Someone recently sang it on American Idol. And I was like, you're no Kermit, ma'am. You're no Kermit.
Wow.
Get off that
yeah.
stage. Where's the big hook
Get off
like
that
they used to
stage.
have?
I know Kermit the Frog, and you, ma'am, are no Kermit the Frog. The Great Muppet Caper was huge. I mean, absolutely huge. That was like in 81. I remember again very vividly all the commercials and the promotion. We were collecting, and as most of America was at the time, collecting glasses. Do you guys remember like the McDonald's glasses that they would give out?
Not for that particular
Yeah.
one, but I know, they did that with a lot of, I think Burger King did some, not for the Muppets.
Yeah, Burger King did some.
But for something else. The Muppets Take
I mean,
Manhattan
we had like the
was
King
good.
Kong glasses. We had these.
Oh, yeah.
They had Disney. You name it. They were doing. It was really, really big, kind of a tie-in for fast food chains back then. But I remember, we were collecting all of the Great Muppet Caper glasses, and that was one of the very first movies that I recall seeing in a movie theater. But that one I really liked. And then, Manhattan and some of the other ones thereafter, I can't honestly say that I've kept up with them. And I don't know if that was just because I was getting older. Or just kind of lost interest, but that's kind of when it all just died off for me until the Muppet Babies came in. And for me, and I think we may have talked about this at least on the Cantina Cast or in Discord, but the Muppet Babies was one of the few times during that time, the few shows during that time where you could see Star Wars footage from the movies, not on the big screen. It was on TV because they would cut over right to all those scenes of Darth Vader or the TIE fighters and X-Wings. And for me, that was a hook. I mean, it's a great show. I mean, that sucker ran for like 7 or 8 years, the cartoon itself, and it's a really good cartoon. But the big draw for me was just the Star Wars content. And then just quickly for Muppet Babies, I don't know if you guys know, but they've just rebooted this thing. And I got Kate, my 4-year-old daughter. She's now watching this, and she absolutely loves the show. So it looks like certainly the Muppets are here to stay. So any final thoughts from either one of you on the Muppets and its legacy and impact?
Jim Henson should have went to a doctor. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. For me, I think that when you look back at the movies that were done, like all the Muppet movies, I thought they were always trying to be a child parody of popular movies of the time. So if you look at like the first Muppet film, for example, I mean, it was really playing off of like all of those cross-country movies of the time, like Easy Rider, Cannonball Run, where you're meeting all these interesting characters along the way. I mean, I think Dom DeLuise was actually in the first one, just like the Great Muppet Caper was following Clue and that kind of whodunit era of cinema where they were just making that popular genre of movie accessible to kids. I mean, that's the way I felt about it at least when I was growing up.
Yeah.
But I hear there's a new Muppet Baby, and do you know who that new Muppet Baby is?
They've shown the Muppet Baby. I don't recall its name. I can't even tell you if it's a boy or girl, but I noticed that it was. If you go out to the Disney app, they've got like 3 or 4 little promos that are about 2-3 minutes long. Because the show I don't think has technically come out. They've just got these little snippets that you can watch, and that's her favorite character right now. Like I'm not even kidding. She, there's Miss Piggy, and they show Kermit and Fozzie, Animal, and then this new character, and that's the one that episode that has her kind of front and center in the spotlight. That's the one that she wants to watch over and over again. So she's already, she's hooked on whoever this new character is. And apologies, I don't know the name of it, but yeah, they've introduced a new one. And I want to say wasn't there I can't remember if they had originally had a new Muppet for the Muppet Babies back in the 80s. Do you guys recall that, or am I making that up?
Did Skeeter get a sister for the original Muppet Babies? Was that what it was?
That's it. I think you're right, because she had like the crazy hair like Scooter, but yeah, I don't remember what her name was. Maybe it was Skeeter. I don't know.
But anyways, this one is a purple penguin.
Yeah, that's right.
But I don't know. I don't know if it's got a name or nothing.
All right. Well, with that, let's move on. So. The reference there obviously was the Muppet Show T-shirt that he was wearing, and he goes on to kind of describe more of that scene. Right, we get the 70s decor, the burnt orange carpet, which I get again. I'm not
this actually hit close to home for me when
the burnt orange carpet,
because that's what was in my room with my brother. We shared a room, and that is what the carpet was. It was this,
and obviously hugely popular color in the 70s. But you got to wonder if, Ernie Klein being from Austin, or at least now he lives here, do you think he was throwing that in there as a tribute to like the Longhorns?
No.
Ooh. No. I don't think so. Yeah, because, I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff talked about in that section. And the part that actually disappointed me you didn't talk about was the corduroy pants reference,
which we all had.
because
Yes,
everybody had the hush puppies with the sweet corduroy pants, along with whatever iron-on shirt we got from the mall.
I remember my Star Wars iron-on thing that you did. Oh, it was great stuff.
Yeah, iron-ons were huge. You'd get them out of the cereal boxes too in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, good times. Good times. Let's get the time machine.
Wow, look at you, Albert, with your highfalutin cereals with proper toys in them.
Jeez. Cereal we got here.
Silver Spoon Kid.
I got fond memories of cereal. We'll get to that at some point in the show. I've got some more stories about cereal.
We're only going to be doing this for 7 years now. This whole thing.
Maybe in year 5 we'll get to that. So the mentioned the orange carpet, the 21-inch Zenith television. It's interesting that he called that out. I wonder if that was, by design, if that was really the television that he had growing up as a kid. I mean, Zenith was pretty popular, and we won't dive into them, but I did look them up just to kind of see where they're at, because I really hadn't heard much about them lately.
They're still around, aren't they? I think,
yeah, they're still around. They were bought out by LG Electronics recently, and I think they manufacture a couple of television sets or something, and they tag it as Zenith, but it's a pretty low-key kind of name now for that company, so I don't know. We'll probably see the end of that at some point. And then finally, he mentions the Atari 2600. So there's mention of Adventure as well, and this is where we get our first reference to the Easter egg and Warren Robinette. But before we get into Adventure, let's start with the 2600. And this is going to be something that I think we'll talk about quite a bit, to be honest, throughout the show. Again, probably in years 3 to 7 or 2 to 7. But I want to just kind of let's start with Will. What's your when did you get your first 26, or did you get a 2600? Because I didn't get one until much later. But did you get one when it was first out? And what was your first experience with it? And what are some of the memories that come to mind when you think about that 2600?
I can't recall ever living in a house where we didn't have a 2600. It's almost like your first memory, we already had a 2600. Yep. I mean, at the time, it was all it really didn't matter. All the basic games that you played on there were great. My favorite was obviously Berserk. That was, in my opinion, the best game that was made for the 2600. But I've got fond memories of probably half a dozen to 20 of them. What I really liked about the Atari 2600 that really didn't stay with the evolution of gaming was all the crazy different controllers that were available for it. I mean, you had you had a trackball one, you had the little spinning one for tennis. It was like every video game that you would purchase had some kind of special controller for it. Mm-hmm. By the time we got to NES, NES made literally hundreds of peripherals, but none of them were as functional as they were for the 2600.
Yeah. What about you, Mike? What's the history there with you in the 2600?
Well, we did, like you, we got ours later. And I still remember this, the night my father came home with the box, this big box. It was in the middle of winter or whatever. It was after, I want to say sometime in February, maybe March or something. He came home at night, had this box, and then, he brought it in and we opened it up and we all played it. The Space Invader, the classics that everyone's played and stuff like that. It was just great. Because I was the youngest, had to fight to play the thing. So I didn't get to play it as much as my brother, my sister, even my father and my mother. It was like going to a war at the time just to play the thing. Right. I mean, I played it for a while. It was great. We didn't get all the games that came out and stuff, but we'd trade cartridges with my friends and stuff that had it and stuff. So, and I remember the E.T. game. I swear I played this game, the E.T. game. I vaguely remember it, and I think I mentioned on last show and stuff like. I remember the Superman game. There's a whole bunch of other
that
stuff.
Was pretty popular.
So I had fun with it. It was great. And then the NES came along, and I forgot all about it. But yeah, I don't remember playing Adventure. I don't remember playing that at all, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to Adventure here, because I do want to. That is one of the games that I vividly remember, and it was one of just stuck with me throughout the years. So for us, like I said earlier, we didn't. So I think it was probably it had to have been about 78. It could have been 79, but it was definitely around then, because when it came out, I had a cousin that had it almost from the onset. He was a lot older than I was. He had it, but I didn't see him. He lived so far away that we really didn't visit much. And so I knew he had it, and I think we may have made one visit out there, and I was pretty young, so I don't remember what I was playing at the time. I couldn't even recall that at this point. But it wasn't until about maybe a year later that one of my mom's closest friends had bought it for their two sons, and we visited them all the time. So this was like I didn't have it for almost 3 years. I didn't even get an Atari 2600 until about 81, but I was over at that dude's house constantly to play it. And he had Space Invaders. I think he had Super Breakout. The combat game, I think it was kind of built in at the time, if I'm not mistaken. That was one of the games that came out with it. Superman, which was hugely popular because of the movie and all that, the phenomenon that started there. Bowling was another one that he had. But I mean, we would just sit there and play this thing constantly. Like this was a huge experience, like no other for us at the time. And it wasn't until later on that, we finally got it, probably about 81. And right when the video game, at least in North America, the industry started to crash, and you were finding, these games used to be $60, $70 out there at some of the stores. And it was in 83, maybe just after that, these things were like $4 a piece. You could walk into any store, any drugstores, like, I don't like the drugstores around here, like Walgreens or Eckerd's or whatever these other stores were. And they were blowing these things out at $4, and they weren't even blowing out all the crappy games that kind of caused a lot of this, or at least were one of the contributing factors to the crash. They were blowing out the big, big name titles like Space Invaders and Defender, and all those guys were $4 a piece. So it really wasn't until that happened that my mom and dad just bought us tons and tons of these things because they were so cheap. And so I came onto the NES later, and I don't want to get off too far of a tangent, but I didn't come into the NES until much later because I had so much media, so much content that I still needed to get through for the 2600 that from about 84 to about 88, I was knee deep in 2600 games just trying to get caught up on everything that was going around. So anyway, so that was kind of my first experience. If I had to name a favorite game, I'm going to go with, and this is probably bad, so you guys can kill me for this one, but it's actually probably one of the games that contributed to the downfall, but it was a game called Fast Eddie. It was released in 1982 by 20th Century Fox Games. And as if you're listening to this show, you probably know that everybody and their mother was making Atari 2600 games at this point. But for whatever reason, that game is one of the ones that stood out. For me, it's right up there with like Yara's Revenge. Berserk, it was another one that stood out to me. Vanguard is another one that I spent, I don't know how many hours playing one summer. And then certainly, Adventure, which was another one of my favorites. So, did you guys play any of those games? Any fond memories there? And have you ever heard of Fast Eddie? Because that's such an obscure game.
Sound familiar at all? Like I can't vaguely remember the ones that I played really. Because, like I said, I had to fight to play, and by the time I got to play, it was already fading out. Like Atari was kind of done. And I moved on to the NES, you know what I mean? Like we kind of because I got it late, and of course my brother hogged the damn thing so much I didn't get a chance to really play. But I remember playing Space Invaders, all the classics, and I remember going over with my friends, like I said, with Superman and all that, E.T., Pitfall, all those. Probably Pitfall, I would think, is probably my favorite one, to be honest, if I remember any of them. But I think I liked every game I popped in there. I never had a problem with any of them. I enjoyed them all. Like you said, with the E.T. one, it wasn't as tragic as everyone seems to think it was. But anyway.
Will, I hear you grimacing back there. Is that because of my game choices or something else going on?
No. I think for once I'm going to disagree with Mike. That E.T. game is unplayable. It is utter nonsense, that game.
Okay.
And
it's not Oingo Boingo like level of hate, but
agreed. But I'm with you. I think it was a time in our childhood where it really didn't matter what the game was, because the game was almost just a backdrop to whatever company you had over, whoever you're playing with. So for me, my favorite games on the platform were like Montezuma's Revenge, which I think is a highly underrated game. I mean, that was cool. I mean, you don't see too many games that have a Mexican protagonist, in the early 80s. You got to go with it, support the race. Tempest, of course.
Vanguard was another one that was kind of in that, or not Vanguard, I'm sorry, Atlantis.
Oh yeah.
You guys play that one? That was another. Not they didn't have a Mexican in it, but
Well,
it had a.
look, if you're playing them, you can just
If I'm
imagine
playing them, then then it
they're
was
all Mexican.
yeah, they were just me in that game.
Yeah, there's a Mexican in the moon sweeper vehicle.
Yeah, or Moon Patrol, right?
Let's go to the moon and just drive.
But that was another one, like Atlantis and Montezuma. That I forget the name of the company that made those, but they had then you got those cartridges that started looking weird. Do you guys remember that? They had an odd shape. They weren't square anymore. They were kind of like oh man, I couldn't even describe it. It was like an inverted T. And then the top of it was kind of slanted. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't remember that.
What was it? There's
So the later games didn't have the regular rectangular shape. They almost look like a 3-dimensional trapezoid. I don't know. I'm sure
and that's just one design. There were several of them, and this is more of I don't know. To your point, as a kid, I didn't really care. But I think it speaks to a bigger problem that Atari had with, and we'll get into this at some point when we do the Atari Game Over episode. But they just really didn't have a whole lot of they couldn't lock a lot of stuff down, whether it was the programming or the packaging or the actual game cartridges. There just wasn't a lot of standards in place, which obviously was another contributor to its downfall. So
by the time they figured it out, it was all but over, right? Because
it's too late.
In our household, I guess we were big time compared to you. We did get to go through the 26 to the 5200 to the 7800. We went through all of those iterations as we approached the launch of the NES. But
now I'm sorry. I was going to say, because I'm looking through the pictures of the old cartridges, and I came across the Empire Strikes Back, and it was that weird shape that you're talking about now. Because I'm used to the little thing there, the cartridge, and now I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, all right, now because I couldn't think of it. Now I'm like, oh, it makes sense now. But anyway, sorry, Will, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
It was very breaking news. I had to get it off my chest. So. But anyway.
This just in.
Go ahead.
So another aspect that I'd like to maybe just hit on briefly here is the art. Because to me, the video game graphics at the time obviously left a lot to the imagination, right? You would have to really, it was so new and it was so novel at the time that it wasn't too hard for us as kids to really kind of go, oh yeah, I am this thing, this little dot on the screen. But when you were looking at the game cartridges, you were a lot of times sold on the artwork. I mean, you'd flip it around, but a block's a block, and they kind of looked very similar. If once you've seen one, you've probably seen them all. It wasn't until later when they really started getting pretty creative with the hardware that they were able to kind of start making things that look like E.T. or Indiana Jones, that kind of thing. But initially, a lot of artwork is what was selling these games. And there is a book called The Art of Atari, which I do not own. I'm this close to buying it. I should have bought it by now. But it kind of goes into the history of the marketing and the artwork that was on the covers. And for me, that's one of the things that really has stood out. That even now, when I go back and I look at some of the artwork on those Atari 2600 cartridges, there's some really good stuff out there. And when you're trying to decide again between this game and that game, and everything looks on the same on the back, sometimes you did kind of get lost in the artwork and go, wow, that really looks pretty exciting, adventurous, almost like a novel, so to speak. So did you guys ever dive into the artwork, and has that stood out for you over the years?
I'll say this. I think Will said this last week when we were talking about the posters for like movies. They don't do them as well as they used to do. I mean, it was an interesting thing because like art was a big part of the whole selling thing, like you were saying, Albert, and the art that was on the box or even on the cartridges and stuff was almost like a movie poster, but just miniaturized. Yeah. And that was awesome. That you could say that like that was probably the best thing of the whole game. Most times was the art, and same thing with the posters, the movie posters. Like even like a not so great movie would have a great like movie poster, or it would be dynamic, or it'd be some nonsense to sell you on this. So here, this is what it should kind of like. It's in my head, but it's really not what you're gonna get. But the poster's cool. And the same thing here, like I'm looking through some of this now, where they got a lot of like, how people do like a modern thing and then they retro it, and they like they do with the VCHS tapes of like say the Force Awakens or whatever. Now they're doing the cartridges from the old days with like new games and stuff like that. So yeah,
I've seen some of those that they've done.
So that says a lot. That means the artwork was something special, and I think I took it for granted back as a kid. Like I thought it was cool then, but you don't think about it until you one of your friends says, "Hey, let's do a Ready Player One podcast thing," and all of a sudden, all this stuff comes back to you, and you're like, "God darn it, it was awesome." Because now it's kind of like just it really doesn't have much. I feel bad for like my daughter and your kids, and that it's like they don't have that. I feel like they're losing out on the specialness like that we had as kids with like this art and stuff like that. Like people actually put time and effort into their craft, and I think now it's just like slam it down, stamp it, and then just send it on its way, and who cares? We're making money on it. But anyway, that's my rant.
Yeah. Any artwork for you, Will?
Well, as you've mentioned several times, I'm a big NES fan. So to me, that was the last generation of artwork matters, right? Maybe not with Mega Man 2, but with just about all the other artwork that was done.
Yeah, you're right, because you think about the NES titles, and wow, that was kind of some of those. I mean, the games it was flipped, right? Some of those games are just amazing and incredible, and then the artwork, maybe not so much, right?
Yeah, but if you look at, I think it's one of those signs of the time, because something our kids are never going to appreciate is just doing the 10 o'clock on a Friday walkthrough of a hole in the wall neighborhood, VHS rental store, and just looking at box art, trying to make a decision as to what you're going to watch that evening. Yeah. And you're basing it on 2 paragraphs on the backside if you're lucky, and then whatever they put on the cover.
The cover, yeah.
Yeah, there's not even a screenshot on it. You're just taking this leap of faith that's a cool name, that's a cool cover. Let's go home and pop this bad boy in the VHS player and see what's up.
Right. That's a good analogy. I think for me, the one game, and we're kind of running low on time, but the one game that I'll mention that stood out was Starship. If you get a chance, take a look at that artwork, because I had this game, I had the box art, and this is a little bit later, but I would go home and the starships that are on there, and I don't know who the author is, and I probably should look into it, but I would draw this starship over and over again. I mean, I had countless papers of me attempting to draw those starships that are on the cover of that game. And because it looked to me, it was Star Wars. It was another ship in space. And, that was obviously one of my early obsessions, but that's the one that really, when I go back to and think about some of the artwork, apart from like Yar's Revenge and Vanguard and Super Breakout, some of the really cool stuff, this is the one that I think stood out for me. So, but let's talk about Adventure, because this is obviously a huge game, not only in the history of the 2600, but obviously a huge influence for Ernie Klein and putting together this book and kind of the premise of what the book's about. But just quickly, Adventure was a game that was released in 1979. You would roam around this kind of fantasy land, and you'd be looking for these chalices. And then when you got the chalice, you were supposed to go back and take it to the castle. And it played this cool music, and it all lit up once you were done. In total, there were 3 castles. There was a gold, a white, a black. You had mazes. You had these super annoying bat that would constantly steal things. You had these 3 dragons. There was like a yellow, a green, a red, and excuse me. You'd also get these items. You'd get items like a sword. There was a magnet. There was a bridge. And you would get these keys, and you'd open up the castle doors, try to get the chalice back in there. So, did you guys play this game? And did you? Well, 2 things. One, did you ever, I guess, complete the game? Did you play any of the different levels? Because it was one of the earlier games that was targeted to have like multiple difficulty levels. And then 2, did you guys ever find the Easter egg that was in there by Warren Robinette on it?
Looking at the thing now, because I Googled it, because I'm going to have to do that from time to time when we go back in the ancient archives here. I remember playing this now because I'm looking at the pixels, I guess you could say. And I remember and you mentioned the bat. I remember the freaking bat now.
That bat was just
because I remember he just would come in all the time, and I vaguely remember this, but I don't recall beating this game at all. I believe I was pretty horrible at it at the time. I didn't know what I was doing at all at the time, and not that was a hard game or anything. I guess I might have got frustrated. Who knows what was going on at that time? But I don't recall beating it. But I'm looking at the photos here. Yeah, I remember this game.
Yeah. Well, how about you? Did you ever get a chance to play this?
Well, I think the 2600 started a long legacy of me immediately throwing away the instructions, which
you still do to this day.
By the way, I still do that as well. So,
I'm completely with Mike here. I know that I played this game before. I seem to recall at no point did I know what the objective of the game was. I was just randomly running around the game collecting things until I was killed by something that resembled a bat. I was excited that I could recognize the graphical representation of a bat. And then I started to look for Berserk. That's typically what we would do.
This So this one was a game when it came out. It was one of the few games that I remember playing over at my friend's house that I mentioned earlier. And this was kind of our Final Fantasy. This was our Final Fantasy weekend. We'd stay up and try to beat this game, or at least complete it, get all the chalices. And honestly, I don't recall ever finishing this or completing it. It was just like hours upon hours of me and him just running around, like you said, completely lost, running from dragons, stabbing them, killing them, that kind of thing. But I don't know that we really got the concept of the game at that age. And it would be years later before I actually went and understood what it was by reading the stupid manual. What's the term? RTFM. So doing that and, finally playing through and kind of understanding. I've had a chance just recently. I've got like a little portable arcade cabinet that's got some games in it. And I did get a chance to go back and play it. And after about 15, 20 minutes, it started all kind of coming back, I guess. And it was actually pretty fun. I didn't mind it. I mean, you got to get past the graphics. And again, you are a little square block, but there's something kind of special about the game, at least for me. And I don't know if it was nostalgia speaking or the fact that it actually was a pretty decent game. But I found myself enjoying it. In fact, I haven't had a chance to go back and kind of complete it, but I got pretty far. And once you get the controls down, they're pretty easy to pick up. I can say that I never found the Easter egg. And I feel really disappointed with myself given just the impact that it has on, it had on Ernie Klein and obviously Halliday and the hunt and the egg that he's got in the book. But it was just nothing that I ever found. And, I've gone back and I've watched some of the videos, and wow, I don't know that I really would even spend the amount of time that's required to go through and find the Easter egg. But it was really cool that he did that. And Klein mentions it, or at least, Wade does in the book, that this was something that was kind of a new concept, because back then Atari didn't really credit the programmers. And so here you have Warren Robinette, who decides, I'm going to go ahead and just stick my name in here. And he did make it seem you had to jump through some hoops in order to get to it. But it is there. I'd asked the question whether it held up and whether there was any replayability here. I don't know. That's really hard to say. And I don't know that it's fair, kind of like we talked about with Space Invaders in the last episode, that this game is so old and it's, there are some cool moments and it's a cool game and that kind of thing. But, given what today, I don't know if that it really holds a lot of replayability. So did either of you get a chance to play this game ahead of the show?
No, but I will be playing it. I have it on my ROMs. I just haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I will play it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will definitely not play this game. I'm certain I won't. I mean, this game is just not one that is part of the connective tissue that links me back to my childhood. And I think the reason why is if you're looking at that time period, the late 70s, early 80s for video games, when I played video games at that time in my life, the concept of a video game having an ending was kind of abstract to me. I didn't really think about video gaming that way. It was, what's the score? Who's got the best score? It wasn't about reaching the end of anything. I mean, when you look through all the different games that existed at the time, it didn't seem like there was an end to them. It was just, you just played them for the sake of playing them, and then you moved on. So I think a game like Adventure that had a definitive ending, just too mature for me at that age, I guess.
Yeah, that's fair. I think you got a good point there, because so many of the games were just focused on, like you said, points and top scores, high scores, and that really was kind of the thing. And here you go, you've got Adventure now that's this action adventure game where, it requires you to, do a lot of stuff to get to an end kind of thing. Definitely a new concept that obviously paid out in the end, because this is, one of the games that, went on to inspire just probably too many people to name, at least in on this show. The last thing, I guess, with Adventure, I'd asked what he was up to, he being Warren Robinette, and just kind of talking about him for a little bit. He went on to do a number of other things. He left Atari shortly after the game came out. This game obviously inspired the Sword Quest games, and those are referenced, and we'll get to those at some point, probably again in year 6 of the show. But the Sword Quest games were kind of inspired from this, and he went on to do. I think in 1980 he started up the Learning Company, which sold some pretty popular games if you were an Apple II or Apple IIe person. And then he ended up selling that, I think, for quite a bit of money. And today, I think he's kind of still out there consulting with VR of all things. So it's kind of funny that he's in that space now, and here he is in the Ready Player One novel, where the big thing is obviously the Oasis and virtual reality. So he's still out there, he's still going, and doing really well for himself. So let's move on. We'll kind of wrap this up here in just a second, but going back to the book, after he drops that joystick, he's transformed into Anorak. He's in the cavern, and we get him. He's got the A's that are embroidered on his robe, and that's kind of relevant because it comes up again a little bit later in the book. We get the first clue. We get to see the keys: the copper key, the jade key, the crystal key. Then he goes into the cavern and comes up to 2 massive doors, and he says, let the hunt for Halliday's Easter egg begin. It fades to black, and then we get our first look at the scoreboard. And we also get mention of Anorak's Almanac, which it's quoted throughout the novel, especially in between like the big sections of the book. And he mentions the hunt for the first time. And then we also get a word that now people in this year are completely obsessed with 1980s culture, including the fashion, movies, that kind of thing. And he makes reference specifically to spiked hair and acid wash jeans at the time. So we'll end it here on this last subject here. But I wanted to just spend a few moments kind of talking about some of the 80s fashion and what you guys recall. I think we mentioned parachute pants in the last episode. I know, Will, you're a big fan of that. I want to say you've got several pairs still that you wear regularly. But for you, William, what do you remember as well from the 80s in terms of fashion and that kind of thing?
Well, you knew me in the 80s. I wasn't a fashionista.
No, not really. I've seen
I remember.
Yeah,
no one's ever accused me of that. I didn't hit my fashion sweet spot until probably 1990, where I actually went to the store and said, I've got to have that. I mean,
and by the store, we mean Jay Riggins.
Jay Riggins. Yeah, we spent at least one paycheck there. I mean, I think in the 80s, I wore just about whatever I was bought.
Whatever mom got you.
Yeah, that's right. You went to the store, and I'd be lucky to get that one pink polo shirt just so I could have that in my repertoire. But it wasn't
really polo, right? The logo didn't look like the polo logo.
No. It was like,
if you squint, you could see the logo, but if not, you're like, no, that's a ripoff. That's from Kmart. We know that.
Yeah, it definitely was. No, I didn't have anything with a name brand on it in the 80s for sure.
Well, Mike, what about you? Were you a big 80s fashionista growing up?
I was pretty much same as Will. I whatever was handed me down from my brother or whatever my parents got me. And, maybe every now and then I could say, I kind of like this. Can we get with this? And then I remember it wasn't until I was around middle schoolish where I got a little better and, I got everything in black, really. And I shaved my head. And that was, my father said, you got to wear everything in black. Why are you going to wear it? And I had ripped jeans and stuff like that. But that was later on. It wasn't like in the 80s, maybe towards the end of the 80s, I started getting into knowing what the hell to kind of look like maybe. But for the most part, I didn't. Yeah. I thought most of it was a joke most of the time. Like you got hearing the things like the bandanas, the members only jacket, all those things. Like I laughed up at all that stuff. I didn't really care. I was too busy. G.I. Joe, Transformers, Star Wars. I didn't care about any of that. So
yeah, and I would echo that as well for me, because if even in the 80s, again, like to Will's point, I wore whatever mom bought me, and it wasn't until like the late 80s, which the fashion was starting to kind of change and shift, that I actually started to care what I looked like, cared what I wore. But I put some of these things down in here, and we'll kind of just touch on them just briefly, but I put some of these things in there because I do remember that, obviously with every era, really, fashion is a big thing. And in the 80s, it was just so crazy, so wild and so out there. And, you looking back, some of these things were kind of borrowed from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, just like everything else. But The spiked hairs, I put that in there just because it's reference, and that was pretty big. Acid wash jeans, and then you had stone wash jeans, and you had this wash and that wash. I mean, there were so many different types of wash jeans that, and every jean manufacturer was kind of making their own. Shredded clothing was another one that was huge, which I didn't understand because I was trying to, I would get in trouble for having holes in my knees, and yet, you got the lead singer from Def Leppard up there, and he's rocking shredded jeans and a shredded shirt, which I didn't think was fair. Bandanas around the neck. I had a cousin who would wear these bandanas, and again, I think it's a Def Leppard influence, or at least a lot of the rock bands that were kind of coming out, maybe from the UK around that time. But throwing that bandana around your neck, almost like a burglar, which was just bizarre. But here they are. He was a lot older. I think he was probably about 6 or 7 years older than I was, but he was out there wearing these things.
But bandanas are very handy to have. You should have one, but just don't wear it around your neck. Put it in your pocket or something normal. But I'll leave it at that.
Right.
No, that's true. Mike, you should always have them. Otherwise, people won't know what set you're claiming.
Exactly.
There could be problems.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
I remember them
That's a
around the
different
leg,
show.
too. I don't know what. There was a few bands that put them around the leg, I think. Was it Motley Crue? I can't remember. But anyway.
Maybe, and I just, you said that, what kind of fired off a synapses for me was the, do you guys remember the feathered clips?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So you'd have like this little clip with a leather band that hung off it. And then off the leather band, there was these branches of feathers. And people would just kind of clip those on, or in the hair. I think the girls would wear them in the hair. The guys would wear them on their jackets and that kind of thing. I don't really understand the,
See, fashion-wise, I think the 80s was kind of a disaster, to be honest. The movies, video games, and stuff like that, that was good. But the fashion, no, I think we missed out on that. But
the feathered haircut was the big one for me. Like, anything that looked like Ralph Macchio or any of those guys. And that's now the second time we've mentioned him in this show. But that was a big haircut style, and I think I rocked that for a number of years, and I don't know why, other than Mom. That's what Mom did, so she told me I had to get my haircut that way. So it was also a time when it was really cool, or at least in, to wear clothing that had, like, name brands on it, like Coke or Corona, Spud McKenzie, right? I don't really understand now, looking back, why it was so popular, but you think about the Coca-Cola shirts. I remember at one point, those were everywhere. Everyone was just clamoring to get those. And then here, 2 weeks after it started making waves, you could find them at every flea market for, a fourth of the cost. And same thing with like the Corona shirts. Did you guys ever get a chance to wear those?
Those were like not authentic, Albert. Those were like printed, that type of thing. No, actually, that again, I was still into my whole iron-on thing on my shirt, I guess, at this time. So, I didn't really care.
Yeah, I think these fashion trends here, the T-shirts and whatnot, flea market accessible clothing, I think this was in my repertoire, right? I do recall remember when Ocean Pacific was like a big thing, like OP, you had to have it.
OP, that's right.
Yeah, or TNC.
Bermuda shorts.
I mean, heck, TNC,
TNC,
spawned video games for the Nintendo, right? They had two of them, right? Just based on that clothing line. I didn't even know what that meant, Town and Country. I didn't even get it. Didn't matter. Needed to have one of the shirts.
Yep, you had to have the shirts, and you had to have the Bermuda shorts as well to go with it at the time.
I will say more than once I sported the polo over the polo to school. I'll say that's the closest I ever attempted to be fashionable in the 80s.
Layers of polo.
Yeah, I got to layer them.
Yep. And then the last thing was the had on here was like the bomber jackets and the members only jacket, which I know is like just kind of a staple of the 80s. And when you talk about fashion, that seems to come up every time. But to be honest, I never owned one. Never had any desire to own one. I always saw that as something that older guys or older boys were wearing. It's certainly not in my area. But do you guys ever own a members only jacket?
Nope.
I had a gray one and a black one.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Well, do you remember the material?
I'm not. I couldn't do that today. How old do you think I am? Oh, it was nice. It was a lycra blend. It was
good
so
on the skin.
Good. It breathed really well.
The details matter, my friend. The details matter.
What I do know is that between 1990 and 1992, 85% of our combined wardrobe was made of rayon.
That's true. Yeah. Thank God for rayon, because otherwise we would have had nothing to wear. All right, so we'll end with the last part of this chapter, which kind of talks about egg hunters. So we get our first mention of gunters, and we know that it took about 5 years. So it wasn't until February 11th, 2045, when Wade finally found the copper key at the age of 18. Anorak's invitation fades to black, and that kind of ends that chapter. So we are through the prologue at this point. So I'll start with Mike. Just kind of final thoughts on the prologue. What anything you want to add to that?
Not too much. Yeah, not there really. I thought it was an interesting. It was interesting how to introduce the book and set up the whole, with the the environment and what's going on and stuff like that. It was pretty good. I thought it was kind of right to the point. But other than that, I don't have too much else to say.
Yeah. Well, how about for you?
No, I think I'll go more with how we approach the prologue on the show here. So, first of all, I'm surprised that when we talked about the whole safe thing, the walk-in safe, that no one made a Twilight Zone reference to Time Enough at Last, because I can't think of a walk-in safe without getting that picture in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and just for your benefit, the name of the artist you're looking for is Cliff Spawn, who drew your favorite spaceships.
Back for Starship.
Yeah. Back in 1977. He's still an artist today. You can visit him at his website at cliffspawn.pixels.com.
Wow, maybe you can get an original print from him and have him sign it. Albert, maybe you can stalk him after you do with Ernest.
Yeah, right. I'll see if I can get those guys together somewhere. But okay, well, for me, the prologue was, we've obviously dissected a lot of it, but it kind of set the tone for a lot of things. And I think that was obviously in the intent. I mean, I was super intrigued by the Anorak's invitation and just a number of pop culture references that we got in it. And I can say that during my first reading of the book, I was expecting to not get as many. And then we're going to get to some chapters where it's just one right after another. And so we'll obviously get through all of that. But it was pretty eye-opening. I was pretty happy reading the prologue, and it certainly left me wanting to continue reading more. So that's going to do it for us for this episode. We're working on episode 001, which will be coming out here shortly. We'll have to find some time to get together and do this again. But in that, we'll be talking Galago, Defender, Asteroids, Robotron 2084.
Nice.
We'll get to talk some Family Ties TV series, which I have fond memories of. We'll get into some comic books, Green Lantern, X-Men, and so much more. So please join us again on that show. And if you want to find us, you can find us on Instagram at The Basement RPO. Twitter, we're at The Basement RPO. Facebook /The Basement RPO. I mentioned it earlier. We've got a Patreon page, which is where you can come and donate money to help support the page and the money that it costs to keep things afloat. We'll put the link in the show notes for that. And then finally, if you have feedback or you'd like to shoot us an email, you can do so at thebasementfanmail@gmail.com. With that, we will end the show here, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Thanks, everyone. The views and opinions of the Basement hosts are of our own and are not in any way affiliated with Random House or Ernest Klein. All quotes, music, sounds, trademarked, and copyrighted material referenced in the show are owned by the respectful companies and creators and are used by the Basement as fair use for entertainment purposes only. It would take me a month to read this whole disclaimer, but sad to say, I don't have that kind of time.